Hi everyone! Welcome to my Read Aloud book review. The book I'll be reading from today is called Brown, written by Håkon Uvres and illustrated by Øyvind Torster. This book is the 2020 Batchelder Award winner. The Batchelder Award recognizes outstanding children's books that were originally published outside of the US before being translated into English. Brown was originally written and published in Norway. This book is about a boy named Rusty who recently lost his grandfather that he was very close with. During the day, Rusty's an ordinary boy who likes to build forts and play and paint with his best friends Lou and Jack. But at nighttime, Rusty becomes a secret superhero who teaches bullies a lesson. How many of you wish you could be a superhero? Do you think it would solve all your problems or maybe create more problems for you to deal with? Let's read from Brown. And we're going to read about the very first time that Rusty makes this transformation into a superhero after some bullies tore down a fort that he had built with his friends. Rusty lay in bed, but his eyes were wide open. He heard a bike braking on the gravel outside and thought he heard laughter as well. But when he got out of bed and looked down at the road, it was dark and empty. Rusty climbed back into bed. He picked up his grandpa's pocket watch and lay there, winding it, but it still didn't start to tick. Every time he felt his eyelids getting heavy, he thought he heard bikes outside and someone shouting and laughing. He heard his parents go to bed. He switched the light on as quietly as he could and crept over to the closet. The 3 cans of paint that he had taken from Auntie Ranvig were at the back. He opened one of the cans and dipped a pencil into the paint. The thick brown mass was so heavy to stir that he could write letters in it. He started to write his name, Rusty. The paint settled back into place. Then he wrote Brown. The surface of the paint leveled out again. Rusty. Brown. He stared at the letters as they slowly sank back into the paint. Then he wrote them again. Rusty. Brown. Standing up abruptly, which means very suddenly, he pulled some brown pants from a shelf and found a black and brown striped t-shirt on the shelf above. He tiptoed out into the living room. There was a light brown throw blanket on the sofa. Rusty took it back into his room and tied it in a knot around his neck. It made a great cape, but the knot was too big. Rusty took some scissors from his desk drawer. He cut out a half moon to fit around his neck. Now the cape was perfect. He used the piece of material he had cut out to make a mask, a superhero mask. Rusty tiptoed out into the bathroom to look at himself in the mirror. There he was, Brown, the superhero. His heart hammered under his brown disguise. He was no longer just Rusty. He was Brown. His mother's brown belt was hanging over a cabinet door, the perfect superhero belt. With it on, he was ready for action. He went back into his room and took Grandpa's pocket watch out from under his pillow. He was just about to put it in his pocket when he noticed that the second hand was moving. Brown put the watch to his ear and heard it ticking. Then he put the watch in his pocket and attached the chain to his belt. Brown picked up one of the cans of paint and tiptoed as quietly as he could to the front door. He put on his shoes, opened the door, and crept out. The air was cold and the wind tugged at his cape. The garage door was open and Brown found a thick brush on one of the shelves in the back. Soon he was running the road to the path on the other side. He knew where Reuben lived, not far from Jack's. Reuben's bike lay on the lawn in front of his house. Brown crept up to the bike, flipped the lid off the can, and dipped the brush into the paint. It clung to the bristles in a great fat blob. Then slowly he started to spread the brown paint all over Reuben's bike. Nice and brown, he thought. I can just imagine how happy he'll be when he discovers he's got a nice brown bike. He chuckled and wiped the brush off on the grass. When he'd finished, Brown crept back out to the road and took off running, his cape flying behind him. He followed the path along the edge of the forest. It was dark under the trees, but Brown wasn't afraid. Superheroes aren't afraid of the dark, he told himself as he ran past the trees. He wasn't far from home now. He was already at the big rock that he liked to climb, which sat there on the footpath ended and the road begins. But now, someone was sitting on the rock. Brown got a fright when he noticed, but was too close to run without being seen. It was an old man. "Hi, Rusty," the man said. "I see you're on a mission." Brown edged closer. "Grandpa? Is that you?" "Of course it's me. I'm just sitting here enjoying the nice summer's night." "But aren't you dead?" "Yep," Grandpa said. "How can you be sitting here then?" "Well, what about you?" Grandpa said. "Aren't you asleep in bed?" Yes," Brown said, hesitating. "I mean, Rusty is asleep in bed. I'm Brown." Grandpa laughed and nodded. "I understand," he said. "In which case, Grandpa is dead and I'm Brownpa." Brown laughed. "What are you doing with the paint?" Grandpa asked. "Well, I was going to paint something." "That's my boy. But you better get on home now before your parents discover you're out and about in the middle of the night." "Will I see you again, Grandpa?" "Yes, of course you will," he said. "I sit here every now and then. I can see your house from here. And at the same time, I can look down to the water. And I can remember the times I went fishing there. Once I caught a huge pike that was almost as big as the boat. Did I ever tell you about that?" "No," Brown lied. "You've never told me that story." "Or did I tell you that time I drove my vintage car down to Italy just to buy a hot dog? Surely I've told you that story, haven't I?" "No," Brown said. "Tell me." Grandpa looked at him for a long time. He laughed a little. "Another night, perhaps. You have to get yourself home now. The sun will be peeping over the hills soon." Brown started to walk towards the house. "See you tomorrow night," he called. Grandpa waved back from the rock. When Brown was back in his room, he took off his disguise and was Rusty once again. He unhooked the watch from the belt. The hands had stopped. Rusty tried to wind it up, but nothing happened. Soon he was back in bed, trying hard to fall asleep. As for his brown disguise and the paint can, they were well hidden in the back of the closet. Thank you so much for listening to me. After hearing this part of the book, what do you think might happen next with Rusty and his grandpa and the bullies? Do you think that what Rusty did, making a disguise, going out in the middle of the night, painting that bully's bike, do you think that was a good idea or a maybe not so good idea? What do you think will happen if Rusty gets caught? Do you think he'll get in trouble? And finally, do you think Rusty was really talking to his grandpa, or was he just imagining that he was? If you want to find out how the story ends, make sure to check out Brown, written by Hakon Uvres and illustrated by Levin Torrester from your local library. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good night.